my existence.
If I had an echo for every time somebody said that to me.
Well, I gotta say it's a good name because it's a family name for me. Yes.
If you could just put your addresses on these at some point, I'll make sure you get mileage. And,
Okay, mine's already taken care of that. So.
you sure?
Oh yeah, I don't need that.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, we're fine.
And I'm going to build them double for us. No, fill that out and pay me.
I'm trying to be honest here. Yeah, I could have filled it out.
But you may owe us. You may have to drive to Cleveland or something.
Yeah.
Where did Mark wander to?
I don't know. Might have been.
I've gone to the restroom.
I thought what we'd do is.
This looks like my family over here. Nobody.
Hey, I'm not a nobody.
No, man. I have few people on my side of the family.
I thought what we'd do is a question. Is just like the first question you start. Just work our way down the panel. Or does people have anything to say about the questions? We'll kind of start with the first question. And then the second question you could start. And that way everybody gets to start.
Second question? Okay.
And I added a couple of questions because stuff came up, like on the right to work thing. I added in the stuff about Indiana
Okay.
and a couple other things like that. So we'll give everybody a chance to talk, and then if anybody wants to add anything in after everybody's done, you can just do that. Okay. Well, I figured we'll start with them and we'll see where it goes. I even added in a few here, like things that came up, like the right to work thing in Indiana, so I added that in on that question, a couple things like that.
Ask Darold all the questions.
Good evening. We'd like to get started here. On behalf of Wright State University's AAUP chapter and bargaining unit, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's panel discussion. The topic is Post-Issue 2, Political Realities in Ohio and Beyond. My name is Marty Kich. I'm the chapter president, and I'll be serving, I guess, as moderator tonight. Maybe interjecting some opinions here and there. I'm very pleased to be joined by our other panelists. Joe, you can keep your eyes in your head. Representing some of the major unions in Ohio. Starting on my far left, we have Bill Bain from the Communication Workers of America. Far right. To my immediate right, Darold Johnson, who's the legislative liaison for the Ohio Federation of Teachers. To my immediate left, Sara Kilpatrick, Executive Director of the Ohio Conference of AAUP. And to my far left, Mark Sanders, the President of the Ohio Federation of Professional Firefighters. Ahead of this discussion, our executive committee put together a list of questions. I've added a couple in based on things that have happened very recently. So we're going to try to go through at least some of these questions and then leave some time near the end if we have questions from the audience for any of the panelists. So we'll get started here, make the best use of the time. So the first question is, what aspect of the referendum campaign against Senate Bill 5 most exceeded your expectations? And we'll start with the
Throw that one down here. Well, the numbers at the end were pretty good, but I think probably the biggest thing that was a surprise is the amount of volunteers. The amount of volunteers that we had from variety of different sources, and it rarely, I don't ever recall having people calling our office and saying, we want to, where are the petitions? We want to circulate a petition. We didn't have to really go out and search for people. We got them just by osmosis, I guess. But that was really the most unusual thing, and how widespread it was, because it was on all 88 counties. That was pretty impressive.
I'll take the second question, which was looking at the combined effort. What were some of the limitations in this campaign? And I think one of the pieces that we sort of struggled with was actually when we got on the ballot, we had to print the petitions, and that, people were ready to go. And I think that, when you got people all fired up, they say we're going to be on the ballot. They wanted the petitions, and we wanted them right now. But people failed to realize we had to reprint that whole bill, and that petition became a book. And so there was a little bit of a lag time there, and I think so getting off the ground and moving our volunteers and capturing that enthusiasm was one of the things that we had to look at. And then at the end, how do you keep that enthusiasm after we filed the 1.3 million petitions? And we had a great campaign. We had 6,000 people march through the streets of Columbus, and we delivered the petitions, and it was fun to unload. But then after we got the petitions up there and got them verified, we had this lull between that and the actual election day. So I think it's like every campaign. You have these where you have a primary, then you have the gap between the primary and the election, and the ramp up to the election in the fall. And I think this was no different from that. And the only thing that was even more so was we're in an off-year election. So it wasn't that we had this big rush to do something. But all in all, the enthusiasm was there in much greater numbers than any off-year election in Ohio, and we did our job. So those limitations were overcome pretty dramatically.
Okay. Either one of the questions, Sarah.
Okay, yeah, all right. Well, I think what exceeded my expectations is the way that everybody came together very early on and stayed together throughout the process. And I know that might sound like a very generic answer, but if you think about when Senate Bill 5 was first introduced and then how quickly it started moving through the legislature, and you're talking about a bill where people's livelihoods are at stake. And so you would think that everybody would kind of go into survival mode and kind of be looking out for themselves and their own groups. But very early on, all of the groups, up here and all of the groups that couldn't be here tonight, we all said we're either going to sink together or we're going to swim together. And there were probably times when, police and fire, for example, probably could have struck a deal where they were carved out of Senate Bill 5 and they didn't take it. And so I think it was huge that we, made a pact very early on and said, we're going to do this together, we're not going to do it at all. So the way that everybody, came together and stuck together, I think most exceeded my expectations, and I think that's ultimately how we were able to pull it off in the end, and pull it off in a big way.
Well, just like, again, thank you for being here, having us here. But one of the biggest expectations was our private sector counterparts, Bill, CWA, and others standing with public sector because, we're all there next. We're all next with the right to work that's coming down the pike. I know we'll talk about that maybe a little bit later, but probably that, and Sara noted that, public sector, we were pretty much there together the whole time, but the private sector coming together. Internally for us, what was very impressive was about a 91% participation rate in the vote from firefighters across Ohio. So that was one of the largest participation rates we've had, as well as labor. And I think that is because this issue broke party lines. There wasn't a candidate potentially that had baggage or likes and dislikes. It really broke all the barriers, and it brought all Ohioans together, really, that worried about dignity of work and the workplace issues that brought our friends, neighbors, family, as well as public sector people together, and it was quite an accomplishment, I think, for all Ohioans, including labor.
Darold had kind of jumped ahead to question 2, but maybe we can
That's what I do.
I wasn't being critical. But actually, you might want to expand on what you said. The second question was, what limitations in our combined effort became most apparent during the referendum campaign? Is the limitation inherent or inevitable, and can it be mitigated in some way? And we can maybe combine that with question 3, which is, what are the major obstacles to continuing the We Are Ohio coalition? I don't know if you want to start on that, Darold?
Well, first of all, I think question 3, the obstacles, are important. Because if we went through this exercise and did nothing with it and learned nothing from it, then we really would have dropped the ball. Because the issues affecting Ohio, affecting Wisconsin, affecting Indiana, affecting Michigan, affecting Pennsylvania, and 13 other states are not just locked into those states. This is a national assault on taking away rights of individuals, and it's being led by a private sector force. And the only way to stop that, which is so anti-American, meaning we are a country that says you will pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and if you don't have something, you should have that benefit. So because we have a pension, shouldn't say that we are a golden pension. Because we have a bargaining right at our workplace doesn't mean other people shouldn't have a bargaining right. It doesn't mean that unions are evil. We got to get rid of the partisan tone, the rhetoric that means nothing, and start talking about individual rights, individual responsibilities, but understanding that we are interdependent on each other. While the other side wants to talk about individuals and individualism, we understand that what I do and how successful I am affects how successful you are. If K through 12 doesn't do its job, you can't do your job in higher ed. If your house is on fire, you hope Mark comes down and puts that fire out. We are interdependent on each other. We're right ready to go into the Black History Month, and so Dr. King talked about this in his speeches. And if we don't understand that, and we lose that, and we lose this momentum around this issue, our rights as faculty members, our rights as citizens, our rights as Americans will be taken away from us so that the corporate structure will be able to survive. And that's what this really is about. And we can document how these bills are popping up in every other state, not just Ohio. But when people stand together, collectively, they can make a change. They can rise up and tell that mountain move, and it will move. And when we stood up in November and we said to that mountain, John Kasich, you're not going to run us over with this bus. We're going to show you how the people will speak. The people will speak with force and power, and we dramatically weaken his force and momentum.
I could take a quick shot at that too, because I much simpler answer than Darold. I think money is going to be a major obstacle in keeping things going. As Mark mentioned, with CWA, we represent about 25,000 active workers and retirees here in Ohio, and about 6,000 of them are public workers, scattered all around a bunch of smaller units. And what we found is that we're subsidizing that fight. We subsidize with funds from our from throughout our union. So public sector was subsidized by the private sector in that thing. But we need to organize. We need to grow our units so in order to be able to have a base to draw from. So that's going to be a huge thing, and we're going to have to be able to fund that because we need to move on the offense, not just play defense. Because we recognize we had this huge, tremendous victory, and all it did was put us back where we were, status quo. Which, when you go back there, it really wasn't all that great to begin with. So we need to begin to use some of this energy and this coalition we have to play a little offense along with the defense.
Yeah, I was also going to mention money as one of the limitations that we faced, and I know that the other side like to paint us as these huge labor unions with cash cow money, and it just wasn't the case. And I think that every organization effectively was able to pool money that they could without necessarily going bankrupt, because we knew we'd be dealing with things like right to work and potentially have to fund other fights, as Bill just talked about. But in terms of obstacles, to We Are Ohio moving forward, other than money and making sure that we have the funds to it, I think that we really need to come to a consensus as a group as to what our mission and goals is. We don't want to take the place of the AFL-CIO. That's not what we're going to do as a labor coalition. But we need to figure out, are we going to be an organization that supports candidates? Are we going to be an organization that focuses on issues that impact public and private sector unions? Are we going to do both? Are we going to go in a different direction? And so, one of the things that we're going to be doing very soon is deciding what exactly our mission is going to be. But I think coming to that consensus isn't necessarily going to be an easy thing, but I think that we'll arrive there. But that's, one of the major holdups right now.
The limitations are a lack of a focused issue. Again, building on the theme that we didn't have a party line candidate necessarily, we had an issue that broke all barriers. So I think that is a limiting factor in how we move forward, let alone with the material issues that were discussed with funding and whatnot. And the obstacles, again, don't want to create issues, but I think that moving forward with the We Are Ohio, and I have a couple key people right here out of Dayton, President Gay Jordan and my brother Dave Wright, who worked so feverishly on that, is maintaining that bond between all of us, because now as we get picked off into different issues, pensions and maybe local government funds and all the funding that goes into the parochial issues of smaller fire departments, bigger fire departments, and all our small world, we start to splinter off and we lose that focus. So I think that's going to be one of the major obstacles besides the material issues is finding something that we all can focus and come together on.
In terms of the focal issue, recently the Right to Work Amendment was passed in Indiana, and there's a group, the same group that put the anti-Obamacare issue 3 on the last ballot, is putting a Right to Work Amendment on the Ohio ballot. Obviously there's a risk if this is on the ballot, because it could possibly be passed, but is in maybe an ironic way, that Right to Work Amendment, the kind of focal issue that several of you have been talking about, that it's a way of bringing everybody back together because it can be presented as Senate Bill 5, or at least part of Senate Bill 5 repackaged, even though it's actually not, because it has to do with private sector workers rather than public sector workers. But is that possibly the focal issue here? And if the Republican leadership keeps it off the ballot in November, what is the focal issue then?
Well, I think that we have a real, in my mind, a kind of a danger that if that becomes the key issue, because one, if they get that far, it's going to brutalize us in membership. It's going to be really tough if that were to get passed. But while we were working on it, it's going to suck all the resources and air out of the room like issue 2 did. We were fighting issue 2 tooth and nail, and at the same time the legislature passed some pretty horrific budgets, and we weren't able to spread around as much as we would like to. So we're still going to have those budget fights, and we're still going to have to do this education around the services that public workers provide and how that's good for the average citizen, and at the same time try to balance out protecting our our near and dear resources with the right to work. Now, what I think we did do right in We Are Ohio that will help us is when House Bill 194, the voter suppression bill, when that came into play, we shifted some We Are Ohio resources into that fight to get the petition signed, to get some things going there, which brought some of the allies that we typically have, but that were looking at the labor movement saying, oh, you guys are just paying attention to issue 2, you're not worried about anybody else's issues. It brought them into the fold also, which helped us, especially like up in the Cleveland area in particular. That helped us a lot with some of our traditional allies.
Well, in one sense, the issue, the right to work issue could come up in 2 forms. They have until July 4th to collect 350,000 signatures to put it on a November ballot. Or they could file those signatures after July 4th and put it on the November 2013 ballot. So it could be an issue that doesn't really show up this year, but it could be on the ballot next year. And if you wanted to say that, I would believe it's not just the state Republican Party, it might be the National Republican Party who wants to win Ohio for their candidate who would say, don't put this on the ballot. However, the group that's putting this on, getting the signatures, so isn't really responsive to the party, so they might go ahead and, we don't know what they're going to do, but it might be an issue that shows up in 2013 and may not show up in 2012.
They didn't get the required signatures for the issue 3 on the last ballot until the state Republican Party devoted resources to the signature gathering. They were well short of the total they needed, which would suggest that if there isn't support from the state party, they might fall short on this as well. There's also the issue that there's a personhood amendment that's being introduced as a way to get the base out on the right. And I'm not sure how, I'm not as familiar with how far that's gone though.
Thanks. Well, this is not corporate personhood, this is fetus personhood. And this, would mean that a fetus would be considered a person under the law. So if a woman were to have an abortion, it would be considered murder. And this is a way to try to get the Christian conservatives who might otherwise sit out an election where you have, either Newt Gingrich, who's not exactly, the moral messiah that they're looking for, and then you have a Mormon and Mitt Romney. And so they're looking for an issue to bring these people out to the polls, that helped elect George W. Bush twice. And so, that's just something that we need to be aware of. As far as, the right to work, we tend to call it right to freeload or right to work for less. And for anybody in the crowd who doesn't know what exactly this means, is that it prohibits a contract between an employer and a union that says that union members have to pay fees, that, you have to pay union dues. And so this obviously takes a lot of teeth out of the unions and would essentially wipe out unions in the state of Ohio. And right-to-work laws have been applied differently in different states. In some states, they've only been applied to private sector unions. In other states, they've been applied to both public and private sector unions. I'm not sure what the language in Ohio says, but I think it was, I would assume that it would apply to both. There are 22 states in the country that already have right-to-work laws. Ohio is one of the remaining bastions that does not yet have one. I think that Republicans are probably trying to put an incredible amount of pressure on this group so that they don't put it on the ballot this year, because I think it would rally labor once again to come to the polls and vote. And I think that could help President Obama's chances of re-election, as well as potentially the Ohio House Democrats for making major gains this year. And but I think that, as Darold said, there's a chance it could be on in 2013. We'll just have to wait and see. But actually, right to work has been tried in Ohio before. I think it was in 1958 when they tried a constitutional amendment, and it was defeated by almost the exact margin that issue 2 was defeated. So I think that it's pretty clear Ohioans don't want this. So, and I know a lot of people in the labor community who are like, bring it on, because it's only going to help us in many ways in November, but we'll see what happens.
Well, as Darold and Sara said, I think it's yet to be determined what the impact is. How do they, how do they strategically use it? As you saw in Senate Bill 5, I think that somebody mentioned being rushed through. Just the whole way, that it was done really turned people off. I think they made a major political blunder when they didn't, Wisconsin. When they didn't do what Wisconsin did, it certainly would have taken some of the safety forces out and maybe made it a different dynamic. But I think, again, it'll be seen as an overreach, as issue 2 was, a Hail Mary, if you will, to the public, because I think kind of like our internal politics, we're kind of split down the middle. With a lot of independents, at least, that's how they want to be seen. So I think Ohioans are the same way. They don't want to go either way. They kind of want to stay in the middle, and I think that's kind of what we represent. At least I know in our dealings with our employers, and I'm sure as others, we just want to, a square deal and do our jobs and move on, and for them to respect our work. And I think Ohioans will reject it, but I think it's yet to be determined how they will use it strategically in an election.
Yeah, the Ohio AFL-CIO has filed a injunction against the language in the revised bill. This is the second time they've done a bill summary, and so that's pending right now. The right to work thing, the 22 states would not include Indiana. The only state outside of the Deep South and the Mountain West that has right to work right now is Iowa, which oddly enough I think is like about 13th or 14th in union membership in the country, but they have right to work. But there are variations, so some of the bills are more limited. I didn't have this as a question here, but Bill, since you brought it up, and I'm not sure if it would apply, say, as much to Mark or Darold, but what are you doing to increase membership, since you mentioned that as something that was critical to the survival of the union in this kind of political environment?
Well, we have a lot of organizing activity going on in a lot of areas, but we were fortunate in the telephone industry to have some language that we negotiated a number of years ago with some of our major employers to have card check recognition. So we're able to, like AT&T as an example, with new companies that they buy, we just need 50% of people on cards. We don't need an election, and so we've bargained in the past to organize now, and that's helping us somewhat. We have organizing drives going on in several places in the airline industry. Our union is very diversified, but here in the higher ed area, we have an organizing drive going on at University of Akron for about 600 people there. We already have a unit in there, and we were working that organizing drive. It was very interesting. At the same time, issue 2 was going on. We had people out there, building the committee and doing active organizing, and then we were able to use, cross-use people during that initiative, and it helped, it helped build a committee. But organizing is a long, drawn-out process, so it's tough right now. So I mean, it's not any secrets to the growth. But we're trying to use what they tried to do with SB5 to help us in politically with candidates, so that we can elect some candidates who hopefully will make it easier to to organize in the future. We went through all of that Employee Free Choice Act stuff at the federal level, and fell just short on that. But as people see what will happen to them without unions, then maybe we can elect a few more people that are more supportive.
I think there was an effort on the other side to portray it that unions are kind of the haves, and anybody who has a little less ought to be, to use Mitt Romney's phrase, envious of the unionized workers. And I noticed during the Senate Bill 5 campaign, the signature campaign, that people were kind of coming around to the opposite view, that maybe what the unionized people had really wasn't that extravagant after all, and maybe more workers ought to have some of those benefits and rights. So I think that was one of the positive impacts of the campaign. Sara, do you want to add anything on the membership?
Yeah, my board told me if we didn't get more members, I wasn't going to get a raise next year. So the AAUP is very committed to membership in this next year. But, one of the things that we're really trying to do is that, as Bill said, it really is an incredibly, and as, the folks here know who are part of the unionizing effort with the faculty here, I mean, it's an incredibly difficult process. And it's doable, but it takes a really committed, active group of people to pull it off. And one of the things we've actually been focused on is trying to build chapters that are at our private institutions, because private institution faculty cannot collectively bargain. And the AAUP is unique in that we do have both unionized members and non-unionized members. And so one of the things we've been trying to do is, bring this information to our private institution faculty and get them on board to support us in things like the Senate Bill 5 Issue 2 fight. And we've also been trying to give them the tools to build themselves up to where they are in effect a union, to build a strong core group of faculty and they can go to their administration and demand respect, just like a union does. So we're certainly focused on building up membership, and as Bill said, using the leverage of our win in issue 2 as a way to garner new members.
One of the things that happened, we were talking about the budget, but one of the other things that happened over the last year was redistricting in Ohio. And this is obviously a disadvantage to a lot of pro-labor candidates because the redistricting generally favors Republicans who are not pro-labor. However, when I was looking at the map of the results of the issue 2 election, I was struck by the margins in some of the areas that are considered either swing counties or predominantly Republican counties. And I'm wondering if anybody has any comments on that. Is there something that that's building out of the Senate Bill 5 campaign that may offset some of the disadvantages with the redistricting?
We're on camera, I shouldn't say this for strategy, but no, I think it's, and I'll send a clear message to the Shannon Jones and the others of her ilk, I guess. When they do their, mapping of these districts, and it's a 65-35, whatever Republican district, however that terminology is, I think what they underestimate is, as I said before, we have a pretty balanced, for better for worse, pretty balanced workforce, party lines. 40% D's, 40% R's, and a big 20%, one of the biggest independent, quote unquote independent, swatches down the middle. And police probably a little bit more conservative. So I think potentially what we're going to try to tap into is that ongoing pissed offness, I guess, I'm on camera, of our members that happen to be more conservative to not forget what happened. So when they do their traditional demographics, in my area, I'm a Cincinnati firefighter. I live out on the west side, and it is Representative Blessing's district, and that's going to be an open seat. I think what they failed to measure is the impact of the large concentration of police and firefighters that live in those areas, that if we can tap into that kind of brings that 60-40 or whatever they're trying to set their margins where everybody's safe, kind of brings it back to a 50-50 that I don't think they've necessarily looked at, but we certainly are, and that's going to be part of our strategy moving forward.
I think one of the things you need to be mindful of, labor didn't win this, the people did, that this was the people speaking about a government that overreached, a party that overreached, and that crosses party lines. And so there were Republicans that voted against this issue too. It wasn't just labor. We couldn't do it by ourselves. If you look at those districts that they drew that were to their advantage, the new districts, a lot of those districts they lost on this issue. There's 5 or 6 counties that they won out of 88. If you look at any map, electoral map in this state, you will never see that much blue on a winning issue. So I think what really that gives us a point is to point out the fact that people will respond to government, be it the federal or state government, when it overreaches. And I think that's the message that we have to carry forward. And for those people who think the state government overreached and are concerned about it overreaching in the future, they're going to vote not on party lines, but on their how they were impacted by this budget and by issue 2.
But we don't have issue 2 on the ballot in the upcoming election. And so that means that the unions, to have a political impact, are going to have to support candidates. So how do you do that in a nonpartisan way? That's the crux.
Well, just tell them remember in November. I think that's the thing that we want people to remember. Say, remember what happened last November. Remember those people who voted to take away your rights to vote on House Bill 194, who wanted to suppress the vote, and make it tougher for people to vote in this state. Remember the people who wanted to take away your rights at work. We got a whole series of things that we have to remember. People, how to protect your pensions. The people who want to take your pensions away from your defined benefit pension away from you, because defined benefit is cheaper to operate than a defined contribution. It also doesn't pay attention to the fact that in this economic recession we just came through, it was those pensioners who stayed in the state that got Ohio through. Millions and hundreds of thousands of dollars in each county are from pensioners who are contributing to that economic base. And so we gotta, it's not that we have something better than somebody else, because the average pension for a teacher is like, $28,000. We don't get the six-figure pension. That's for the administrators to get, not for us. And so, and then for our school employees, their pension is like $14,000, $15,000. Where's the golden parachute in the $15,000 pension? So these are the kind of things that we need to get out to people, and when they're making those selections about who they're going to vote for, and support those individuals who will support their rights at work.
So we're split, though, a little bit between, are we opposing candidates who voted for these various pieces of legislation that were disadvantageous to middle class, to workers, or are we supporting candidates who voted for us? Are we focusing on that? We're talking about limited resources. Where do we concentrate the resources? On those who voted with us, against those who voted against us, or with the people that are running against them? How are we going to target resources to make sure that we make the best use of the resources that are available to us?
You gave us those questions, and early on, that was one that was difficult to kind of formulate an answer to, because one, I don't think that we should be, and we're talking about unions here, because as Sara said, Ohio hasn't even decided whether, how they're going to play in electoral politics or what they're going to do. But, we'll support, our union's position is we'll support politicians that support our initiatives, no matter which party they're in. It just so happens a lot of them, end up in one party. And there are times, they're rare, but there are times that we will actively try to take out a person that we supported because they fell short of, our expectations, or they need to be held accountable, whether they're, once they're elected. And we have a tendency as the labor movement to forget that. We get people elected and we forget about what they're doing until the next election, and we don't stay on them as heavily. But I think there'll be some interesting twist to this one, because I know we had, knocking on doors, we had a lot of folks that said things like, they admitted they voted the wrong way in the election. They would say, well, I voted for this governor, and I'll never vote for another Republican again. I mean, all of us, I think, heard that, but what typically we don't hear is the admission. People don't jump up and down and say, yeah, I voted for these people. They quietly say, well, I'm going to look at this. But we heard that time and time again, and if there is any accuracy to that, it could change in some of those areas that are marginal. And with these districts, how they are, what Mark is saying, some of them would be pretty close, and if they're going on old numbers, some of that could change dramatically.
I'll just piggyback. I think working to ensure the defeat of Ohio legislators who voted for Senate Bill 5 is the first priority in the primaries. And I think that's where we can do it. And I think in the primaries, I think it's working to defeat those who voted against, or voted for Senate Bill 5, if you will, voted against our position, to clear that up in the primaries. And we have one right here. Eric Spicer, right? Police officer stepping up. And he's going to be supported, I think, by public safety in this area in a 4-way primary right here. And February 23rd, if you want to come to a fundraiser, you can see President Jordan and Dave after the thing. But no, seriously, I think that's in a 4-way primary. I think you must make people remember the overreaching aspect of this. This is a Republican primary, by the way, too. That will probably be a Republican seat. So I think we typically, as an organization, typically don't get any primaries. But I think to answer the question here, I think first you have to look at primaries that you can make a difference to keep that message out there that we're not going to forget. But secondly, I think you have to support those who supported you in the tough fight, especially in the Senate, when we had several Republicans break ranks and go with us. So we certainly can't forget that, but we certainly can't forget those other traditional labor supporters who have been with us. And really, that was the fight. The initial fight was in the Senate. So I think it's a combination of the two. But I think to be proactive, you have to go after those in the primary that are vulnerable.
Shortly after issue 2 was defeated, there was a news report that the Democratic Party was fielding a record number of candidates in the legislative districts. Has that phenomenon had any legs? Is it something that we're seeing kind of coming to fruition in the campaigns?
We have a record number of teachers who are running for state office this year. And who are running as Republicans and Democrats. There's like 13, and every time we turn around, we find another one. So there's like, right now, we have 2 teachers who are running in the state Senate races, and the rest are running in the House races. And we have one of our members, we have 3 of our members running. One's been elected from Toledo, Teresa Fetter, and then we have 2 more running in districts where we need to take over those seats, and with legislators who were strong advocates of supporting Senate Bill 5. And if you remember, Senate Bill 5 changed dramatically in the House. It got dramatically worse in the House than it came out of the Senate. If you thought that was impossible, but it did. And so that's the good thing that's come out of this, because we got police, we got firefighters. I just called a firefighter today we have in Columbus who's in a primary to tell him that we're going to back him in his race. He's in a Democratic primary. We're going to back him in that race because we need to win the seat, because the Republican challenger is somebody who worked for the Speaker. So we want to make sure that we get those voices who understand what it's like to be on the front lines of protecting the community, putting out fires and educating our kids, and making sure we have a safe and secure future into the legislature where they can make a difference.
I think that's encouraging that you're both talking about some Republican candidates, which keeps it as a nonpartisan effort, at least to some extent. What can other unions in the state do to complement or assist what your union's trying to accomplish? If you had an ideal wish list, what would you want from other unions or other groups in the state, not necessarily just unions?
A super PAC.
Send us money.
Get Stephen Colbert to come to Ohio and use the super PAC money in Ohio.
Why don't we have a super PAC?
Well, I think one of the great things about what happened with We're Ohio and all of the groups that came together was that, we got to know each other really well. And, I went up with Seth Rosen, who Bill Bain works with, and we went to the University of Akron and we did a couple of forums together about issue 2. And I met a lot of the CWA folks, and actually I've received a number of calls from them because they're organizing up there and they want to see how AAUP and CWA can partner. And so I think there's a lot of joint efforts that we can be doing on campuses together and in communities together. I know that Jay McDonald, who is the president of the Ohio Fraternal Police, he has been emailing us, telling us about his candidates who are running in primaries, particularly the Republican primaries, and saying, hey, we want you to support these people. So I think the lines of communication have really opened up in ways that they haven't before, and I think that we're already seeing ways that we're supporting each other.
I have 2 other questions here, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. The first one is, we're talking about things that you were talking about, stuff like the budget that's kind of gone by the wayside because we're focused on things like issue 2 and potentially the right to work amendment. One of the things that's involved in the budget is this push to privatize state assets. 4 prisons were recently privatized, and I noticed that they were claiming 13 million in savings, which is a dubious number, for over a biennial budget, so that's $6.5 million a year, which against the 27 billion budget is like a quarter on $1,000. So it's a very small savings. And we, apparently they're proceeding with privatizing of the turnpike. Even though the liquor stores make $250 million a year for the state, they're looking at privatizing those. Are these all issues that are beyond our capacity to fight, or do we have to wait until we have legislators who can perhaps turn the clock back on some of them?
Well, I'll try to address that both with that and the previous question. One of the things that we can do working together is through some of these other coalition efforts, and one in particular that I wanted to mention, I have some information on, is One Ohio Now, which is a coalition that we have, some of us have partnered in for a couple of years now, but it's to create a balanced approach in the budgetary process, and in keeping with what I said earlier about trying to play some offense. Some of us would like to address the issue of revenue in a manner that, and use the T word, taxes. And we, 4 years ago, we were struggling in our union talking about race and then the president's election, and that was very personal, very difficult to talk to folks, but we came out, and my boss, Vice President Rosen, went out, forced us kind of sometimes against our will to go to places and have those hard discussions. And we were successful in getting people to open up and have a lot of discussion around that sensitive issue. And we were very successful in that election, contrary to what a lot of naysayers were saying. And we have a great president. So right now, we're having difficulty talking about taxes, and people just don't want to talk about it. And the One Ohio Now coalition could use some other resources from other labor unions and organizations, and some human services organizations, and some labor unions and others that are like-minded, but talking about some things that are relatively simple, but not if you don't want to talk about taxes. So we need to have that conversation of whether the 1% begins to pay their fair share, and if we can educate people and do the right kind of training out there and use our union resources in supporting that endeavor, then maybe we can get people recognizing that, a small bump in going back and fixing some of the corporate tax loopholes that were changed in 2005. I know Darold's well versed on this, probably way better than me, but we did polling, and some of the polling suggested that people believe in taxing folks if they make $250,000, to go back to the old tax structure that they paid a little more if they made more, and if they made $500,000, they were in favor of a little bump on top of that. And we need to, that's the average people saying that wouldn't be a bad thing, so we need to educate folks and figure out how do we get some additional revenue into the process, because we've just been cut, and we can't do that anymore. So, but.
One of the unpublicized, and not completely unpublicized, but I think less publicized than might have been, aspects of the state budget was the number of tax cuts that were included in that budget, which was supposedly an austerity budget. But yet there was room for, I've seen statistics from 7, 8, 9 billion to 16, 17 billion, various calculations of what was taken out of the revenue from the previous governor's budget. Either of you want to pick up on the previous question?
Well, some of the hidden, and not necessarily selling off the assets, I think that's all part of it, but some of the hidden issues that we really don't get to look at are like local government funds. And we were having a discussion earlier tonight. I think that was a purposeful squeeze on local governments to come to a crossroads budgetarily to put the pressure on to, support Senate Bill 5 in passage, because it was going to be a cost savings. We showed it's not. That local government funds, to the tune of about $388 million last year, and another same amount the next year, and I think 3.5, billion to local governments and schools. So everybody's feeling squeezed, but nobody wants to talk about that they just kind of move that money to do these other gizmos they're doing, like a unfettered business, One Ohio, what was the, give me the business, Jobs Ohio, to the tune of $1 billion sucked out of the economy and given to Jobs Ohio over the life of that contract per se. So local government funds have, especially townships. Townships have been especially hit, as well as our larger cities. And the other, and I'll quote my friend and my Senator Bill Seitz, who really came on the scene for us over this issue, the estate tax. Many of our townships who, suburban townships in Cincinnati, for instance, where people have save their money for their kids or what have you. And as Bill Seitz says, do you want to pay taxes when you're dead or when you're alive? So, he chooses to pay taxes when you're dead. Well, they eliminated that. And that has devastated several townships that really lives a major part of their budget off of the estate tax. Nobody really thinks of that, but these townships are going to cut a lot of services, vital services, in the next 2 years because of those decisions. So, and I've always talked to my Tea Party friends, if you will, or counterparts, about the Tea Party people ought to be very upset that if they sent $1 to Columbus 10 years ago for local government funds that were supposed to come back for infrastructure, public safety, libraries, and the like, that by virtue and Governor Strickland stabilized those cuts and really built in some increases as taxes as tax revenue came back, which would have really helped that funding this year. But they ought to be very upset that that same dollar they sent to Columbus that was supposed to come back to their local governments have been cut and cut and cut and cut and cut by those people they elect that go to these private entities and these other ventures they want to do. So if you're ever talking to some of those people about taxes, well then ask them about local government funds, about how that dollar is no longer a dollar that's coming back to your local government. That deal was made, in the Depression era when they started state taxes, that would be a portion to uphold local communities. So that's quite a shame.
And I would certainly be remiss if I didn't bring up the fact that they're trying to essentially semi-privatize public colleges and universities in Ohio through this enterprise university plan. And Darold and I were just talking about this on the way down and what we've been hearing about this, and we're expecting not to necessarily see this in a separate piece of legislation, but to see it in the reappropriations bill. Essentially, the Ohio General Assembly is going to have to redo the budget because what Kasich and his administration relied on last time was just, they were bad numbers. And so they're essentially going to have to redo Ohio's budget. And in that, we expect to see some of the changes for this enterprise university plan. And so, one of the key things is that university administrations and boards of trustees would get a lot of authority that the Ohio General Assembly currently has. And essentially the universities want to be deregulated, the university administrations and boards of trustees. But in having that deregulation, they would no longer public taxpayers would no longer be able to see a lot of the things that the universities are doing. They wouldn't have the same kind of reporting requirements, and universities, in order to become enterprise universities, would have to say, well, we're now giving 10 to 20% of our funding. We have to set that aside for a scholarship. And the scholarship is supposed to help retain the best and the brightest and draw them to public universities like Wright State. But who are the best and the brightest? You think about it, they're going to be going to the wealthy kids who are coming from the wealthy school districts, and so now we're in a situation where they're going to create a plan that takes money away from kids who actually need the funding to attend a public college and give it to wealthier students who don't really need it. And so, this is another example of trying to sell off, more public assets, because one of the other things that this Enterprise University Plan does is gives authority to university administrations and boards of trustees to sell off and lease public land. And so generations of taxpayers have paid for these things, and now we're just going to give them the authority to sell them off, in one time, just like the turnpike and just like the other things that Marty mentioned. And so we need to be cautious and be on top of that plan and review that reappropriations bill when it comes along.
The Enterprise University proposal is, of course, kind of like the Right to Work Amendment, also going to have a big impact on the private sector labor unions, particularly those in construction, because it's going to significantly raise the project threshold for which you have to use unionized labor. My last question here, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. We started off talking about what was going on in the different states around primarily the Midwest, but also in the Northeast, that there's similarities between what people are facing in a bunch of these states. Where do you think Ohio stands in this whole group of states that are facing these issues in terms of our advantages or our limitations? If you kind of as a ranking among these states, how well are we doing?
Well, I'll just say Wisconsin sweatshirt right down there, but what's given hope to other states is what's happening in Wisconsin and what happened in Ohio. AFT had a legislative conference in December, and we had a panel with folks from Ohio and folks from Wisconsin and folks from Texas. And the interesting part was after we finished, when we started talking to our colleagues from other states and how they were inspired by what happened in Wisconsin and what happened in Ohio. That gives them hope. They may not have all the tools we have, like in Michigan, they don't have the same kind of tools we have. In Indiana, they don't have the same kind of tools we have. But thank God we have what we have. We can't recall a legislator, but we can referendum. And so we can do a citizen veto. And so I think that's given hope. We're using the tools that we have in Ohio. Let's give hope to other folks that they can stand up to this barrage. But I'll tell you this, if we don't learn the lesson from Ohio and Wisconsin, and Michigan and Indiana and Pennsylvania, we'll see that repeated at the federal level where we don't have any of these recourse. And there'd be no holds barred. And we know that those people who are moving this agenda know two things. Let's keep them busy so they have multiple issues to address, and let's move our agenda. And they're very good at doing both.
I think we, our district represents 5 Midwest states, and we kind of have a little bit of a competition sometimes, but once all of this stuff hit, we recognize how closely we were all in the same fight. I mean, the same people are writing these laws, right? They come out of that ALEC organization or what, and they're almost word for word. So we learned from Wisconsin, as an example, we learned to have a broader coalition. That labor can't win these fights on our own, so we kind of followed their lead and I think successfully used that tool. And we also recognized the students. You mentioned the student issues. So our organization is committed some resources to the Ohio Student Association to try to help bolster that growth, because if you invest in them, the thought is we invest in them while they're young and help their causes, that as they go along they will reciprocate in some form. They were the ones in Wisconsin that started that whole thing, and labor was kind of smart there because we kind of got out of their way and let them build that, and then we played off of that later. But these various organizations that are out there that helped us, we need to reciprocate and fund some of those.
Can you describe that student organization, because a lot of people might not be aware?
Sure. Well, what Bill just mentioned is the Ohio Student Association, and they just formed literally within the last couple of weeks, but this is something that's been developing for a long time. And this is a group of students that is committed to progressive causes, and they're committed to things like battling against high tuition and textbook costs, but they're also about fair wages, and actually while they were in Columbus, they went and marched down to Kroger and were protesting something. I can't even really remember what it was, but so, they're just really, involved, and they want to be active on a lot of different issues, and they want to support us. And the AAUP, the Ohio Conference of the AAUP, just also committed resources to them over the weekend to help them start up, because we need students to be involved. A lot of these issues directly impact students, a lot of them indirectly impact students, and sometimes they don't realize it. One of the things I told them when I was speaking to them a couple weeks ago was, you don't even realize how much debt you're incurring until you get that letter after you graduate that says you have to pay this back. You call this number and we're going to set you up on a payment plan. And so it's very easy to take advantage of students. So finally students are coming together in Ohio and saying, we're fighting back. And so I know that there's a lot of groups that are supporting them, and hopefully, we can all work together, because, I think Bill's right. I think that the students in Wisconsin were huge, and I think that we need them as we continue to confront these issues.
Just a couple of quick items. Darold, you're right, gave him hope. Gave him hope because I've been to Wisconsin, spoke in California, actually, who has a very major issue going with paycheck deception and taking their ability away to even collect dues and use it for operations. But so it has given them hope, but it's also, we've been able to share intelligence, if you will. I mean, just things like, public employees consistently polled at 65 plus approval rating across Ohio. And I'm kind of an intangible guy, you throw the Hail Mary, you win, but I was really sold on good polling, being inside and watching it. And, but I think that shows that Ohioans, as well as other states, value public service. And sometimes us in public service, we forget that because of all the, getting hit over the head that we take. But the polling continually showed that firefighters, teachers, nurses, were well above that 65%. But in general, again, I think just giving hope and sharing intelligence and modeling with how we did things and just our experiences helped across the country.
I'm not sure where college professors, how they fared in those
I
polls.
consider you a teacher, an educator. I should have said educators.
We'd like to open it up to questions from the audience. Go ahead. Mel, go ahead.
First, thank you, everybody. Mr. Bain, this is teamwork. I thought you were going to mention financial league, TNT. How can it be so common, given what just happened? Never in the history of American labor. Unions had to fight for their very existence like this, and you all did so well. But you can't forget it. We cannot let that dissipate. This is a problem that's not going away. And in that regard, I want to ask you two things. First of all, whatever happened to We Are Ohio? Are they still around? They got in Florida to relax? Or will that continue? The second thing is, can you please tell me, what was the role of AFL-CIO in this terrible dilemma? Thank you.
Mark can speak to the AFL because he's real close to the AFL. Go ahead, Mark.
Well, I think that the role the AFL-CIO played was obviously a very supportive role. I think it was a strategic movement that obviously you want to build a broad-based community coalition through We Are Ohio that was focused on this overreaching issue that impacted all Ohioans. And through We Are Ohio, certainly wanted to tell the story of how it adversely impacted Ohioans. The AFL-CIO certainly helped bring all of its affiliated organizations together in that effort, and also setting in different tables, if you will, as they were described. Certainly worked with those partners who maybe weren't affiliated with the AFL-CIO to provide some glue as a federation that helped hold things together. So the AFL-CIO, behind the scenes, maybe more than typically in a labor battle, because it wasn't about labor necessarily. It's about communities and about how affected our citizens. So, you know, they played the role that was necessary, as everybody did, to win this and be successful, to the tune of, you know, 61 and a half or whatever the numbers are to the 38 and a half. So they certainly understood the importance of coalition building through this. And your other question was about the T word, and I've used that as well, but I'll leave that to somebody else.
Well, I think we had a unique opportunity to talk about taxes, or the explosive nature of this overreaching of the Republican Party, at least the majority as it constitutes today. Because thanks to the attacks going on in the Republican side in the presidential race, talking about, you know, whether you pay 30% or 50%, and whether a secretary pays more than somebody in the 1%, that allows us to have this discussion. And I think, so now there's room to have this discussion about revenue. And I think, as Bill was saying, the One Ohio Now coalition is the grassroots coalition, again, that wants to talk about revenue, because it understands the problem in this last budget isn't going away. We need to talk about long term, and we need to stabilize and fix it. You can't cut your way out of providing services to the public and have a good and healthy state. So what we're saying is, we need to look at those people who have made their money in the last 10 years. We need to look at cuts, and we need to have a balanced approach to how we move forward. And so that the folks that have bearing the brunt of the load in terms of supporting the economy, that are the retirees and the middle class and the working class, we want to say we've done our share. It's time for other people to kick in. And I think as We Ohio is continue to meet, they're trying to figure out where they will go in the future and how that fits. And I think we will see something from We Ohio in the future. We just don't know what it is yet.
Yeah, in terms of the We're Ohio question, I mean, the best analogy I could use is that, you know, labor is a big family. You don't always get along with your family all the time. And it was like, you know, issue 2 was kind of like a funeral where everybody came together and everybody's hugging each other. And now the funeral's passed and you realize, well, you know, we don't have this central issue necessarily to, you know, to come around again. But the thing is we've built so many bridges and we don't want that to stop. But at the same time, you know, there are kind of these, things that labor has to get over. And we have to, you know, revisit some of the issues that we've maybe put on hold for a long time and make sure that we're able to move forward as a coalition. And like I said, I think, you know, one of the big obstacles to We're Ohio moving forward is, you know, we have to define what our mission is and make sure that we're not, you know, somehow supplanting what the AFL-CIO does.
Go ahead. Yeah, right behind Mel. Go ahead.
What energized me most in February on a cold day with fellow teachers, I got to be in the State House. And on that day, I talked to firefighters, police, nurses, county workers. That changed my life. And that day forward, I worked on Senate Bill 5 Overturn Ed, and now working on the campaign with President Obama coming up. But we need those kind of events. I was off the ground in terms of anyone wasn't my friend that day. I felt so empowered. We keep that energy going. That's what we need. That for once, I was not just with teachers in a union, I'm with my brothers and sisters in all different capacities. What a wonderful moment that was for me. I thought also in terms of We're Ohio, they did a great job on advertising. When I went out to canvas, they knew Mrs. Johnson from Ironton. They saw the firefighters and the police. We fought back when they took the woman and told the story wrong. You know, and I thought, I'm so proud of how we did that. That was a wonderful moment. And that helped me so much. Those phone calls and talking door to door. But what worries me is this. At every event I went to, each rally, whether it's Poe Avenue, 2nd Street, talking with Ryan McClain, Trace Straightborn down in Montgomery County Democratic Headquarters, wherever I went, I'm seeing people that are older. I'm seeing people my age or older. I didn't see enough young people in the unions coming out. That scares me. I'm glad to see our students getting involved. That when you go to the
Well, you're not wrong, and that's a challenge for all of us. In addition to organizing, is how do we engage our young members? And I think the one thing that was interesting for our younger members, who see us as this bargaining for their contract, or that's what they could do, what we could do for them, is for the first time they had this flashback to the 60s, you know, the civil rights movement they read about and saw on TV or whatever. For them, this was their time to be active. And for the generation in between, this was their first time to be active. And I hope we don't have too many more of these things to make you feel empowered and alive, because I don't know how many more we can take. But I hope we lower the bar for you and you can get excited about other things. But you're absolutely right. I think that was what was the good thing about the State House rallies, where you saw all these people from various backgrounds, young, older, retirees, and for us, it was a way to see our younger members get really active, and that was the exciting thing. But I think they were relating it to this was their chance to stand up, and some of the testimonials they gave to our membership was, hey, other people stood up for me so I could have a union. Other people stood up for me so I could have the right to vote. Other people stood up for me so I could sleep in any hotel. So they were relating this back to what they saw in the past and said, now is my time. And I think there's other people like that. And I think we certainly have that challenge this year. We got the issue of race. We got the issue of workers' rights. We got the issue of voting rights. You know, we still got a governor from New Jersey talking about if they could have a referendum in the South, wouldn't they love to have that so they could get voting rights easier? Come on. So we still have people who want to reinvent history, even from 4 years ago. So that's going to be a constant battle for us. But John Kasich is our organizer of the year, and because he's done more for us than we could ever hope possible.
And Darold hits it on the head there. I think if our young people keep getting bashed around, they'll do that. But you must realize, too, we got to teach them how to do that, because we haven't had to. Collective bargaining took all that away. My father was a firefighter and kind of did the same thing I did, and he was on a dozen strikes over 18 months. In the late 70s, Ohio led the country in public safety strikes. And people forget that, and those younger members never had to go through that. So this was actually almost, using, and they're gone. I mean, that's quite some time ago, 35 years. We're probably have a few of those people still around in our ranks, but they're slowly going. So we have to pass that along of why you don't want to go back. And if we do have to go back, then we have to certainly build upon this experience, but not forget our past on being able to wage those year-long battles. And that's kind of what this was. So you had to use a little bit of the old and the new.
We have a question from a younger member of the audience back there. Go ahead.
Given the option of, we're going to either have a quick wage freeze or there's no layoffs, or we get 2% wage or we're lay off because it seems like a lot of times older people are more likely to take the wage increase because they don't have to worry about being laid off until it's in the first quarter. So that might, I don't know, I think alienate some of the younger members a little bit because they feel like they're always being sold out. So I think making some sort of taking action to kind of close that gap a little bit.
You're hitting on, on a traditional problem that we've had forever with the different levels of people, different levels of seniority and those kind of things. But I think that perception may be more of a perception than it is a reality these days in a lot of the cases, because of the units that we work with, they've actually come down to that kind of scenario. If we take pay freezes, we can keep more people working, and we've taken that position more times than not. And the employers know, as the elected officials know, that they can drive all kinds of wedges between people by using those kind of issues. And so, we need to, attempt to try to get over that. We did do one other thing this last summer, that we tried to reach out to some younger people through the Stand Up Coalition, which is another, a lot of coalitions going on these days, but another one that was designed around the idea of trying to harness some energy and getting people into the street for various kinds of demonstration, and getting right to the young people who traditionally have been participants in that. We did 15 events around the state. One was here in Dayton. We did, we culminated that in a event in Columbus in August. That was a free concert that we fell short of our goal, but we still had thousands of people there. It was an interesting experiment, I guess, if you will, and that coalition continues to move on and is looking for these same kind of ways to invigorate a number of different sectors, not just young people. But retirees is another area where we need to find ways to harness that energy for political causes and legislative causes. So.
Dan, you had your hand up, and then we'll get Rudy.
What has been the impact of Senate Bill 5 on local relationships between labor and management? Right? I'm just envisioning these meetings after Senate Bill 5 was passed. The next day, the superintendent and head of the union sit down, look at each other in the school district. Well, what are they going to say to each other about Senate Bill 5? So, in your estimation, what has been the impact of Senate Bill 5 on the local level, local relationships between people?
Well, I think there were two scenarios. The one scenario was a lot of our locals worked to get their contracts extended or renewed before the referendum or the bill passed, so that they would have 2 or 3 years to work things out in the future. And the second thing is, some of these locals that were hedging their bet that this was going to fail and were trying to implement some of these SB 5 measures in advance of the vote, those negotiations stalled. And what we saw happen at the state level and at the local level was that once that got off the table, the two came together and they worked out a deal. What we also have to understand is, not when we're talking about, Bill's talking about concessions, we have made over $1 billion worth of concessions in the last few years. So it's not like we're trying to get rich off of these. We understand there's fewer dollars, and so we were making concessions. Our members in teaching in K through 12 either were taking cuts on health care or health care and pay over the last couple of years before SB 5 was even thought about. So we showed that through We Are Ohio and demonstrated, and I talked to a lot of reporters and I talked to some members. And when I got the press clips and showed them that our members were making concessions in 2008, in 2009, and 2010, that sort of changed their whole view of this a little bit, because those who wanted to listen to the facts saw that we aren't trying to enrich ourselves. We understand there was a budget crisis in different districts, and when there was a time to make those concessions, we made them. And so that I think now we're on a different footing. I think people are understanding that the unions come to the table as respectful of cuts, and if there has to be concessions, there will be. But then again, we got to be recognized for the job that we do, and that the services that we provide and how they're important to the community as well.
Rudy?
Yeah, I think that the Occupy Wall Street movement, to some degree, raising the question of inequality, put the question of taxes back into the political discussion. There wasn't much discussion of it before that, in recognition that we have a big problem with inequality. But
Well, and I'll give it to Sarah real quick. I think, you got the Tea Party on one side, the 1%ers on the other side. You have a lot of disgruntled people, and I think taxes, forget all that. I think we need to start building something again in America. People need to start having worth at work, creating jobs, creating stable working environments, and I think some of that goes away. I think the anger is built up because, everything's being shipped across everywhere else. We've got a couple wars going on. People are not working, and we're not building anything. And if we would work and we would build things, then maybe some of these local government funds, school funding, university funding, a lot of that pressure goes away, and a lot of that anger on all sides go away because we're focused on making America work again. So I think that's a big piece of the puzzle. Maybe not answer your question, but brings everybody.
Let me say something too on that, because I think, one of the things we have to recognize is unions didn't win this fight. We collectively won this fight and on SB5, and we did it by engaging everybody and making them recognize why these services were good to them. I mean, we heard it ad nauseum. It's unsafe, it's unfair, and it hurts us all. And one of the reasons we were successful, I think, is because we had a clear message. We stayed with that message. We polled on it. We put, when we recognized that firefighters were what really made people recognize how unsafe this would make their lives, we put firefighters on the commercial. And those things make a difference. It's very strategic. But if we can tie what we do to the services, the public services that people provide, or make them recognize that, then that's one good step in the right direction. If we can teach them and get out the message, a direct relationship of union density, as we're down to, I think, 12% now of the workforce are unionized, and as that number dropped, so did the wages leveled off, the every kind of benefit you can imagine, from healthcare to pensions, and all those things dropped because of union density. So that's very clear. It's just real hard to be able to educate folks without appearing like we're self-serving, that we're just union thugs trying to sell their wares, because we get, more dues gives us more power. But there is a direct relationship, and we need to try to find ways to educate around that.
Rudy, I hesitate to tell you anything about economics, but no, I mean, seriously, just last night I was watching Rock Center with Brian Williams, and they were talking about, this one company, this furniture company that just moved all of its workers, they just moved their operations from China back to America. And they're saying now that because of globalization, it's actually starting to even out. The Chinese workers by the year 2015 actually aren't going to be any cheaper than American workers. And so we're going to see this influx, like millions and millions of jobs actually coming back to the country. So I think that there's going to be this opportunity over the next several years as jobs continue to come back to this country to have a conversation about what unions can do for people who are now reemployed or employed for the first time. But I think you're absolutely right. I think it's not just about wages, but it's about or not just about taxes, but about unions actually lifting people up in terms of wages and also in terms of working conditions.
You had your hand up before. Do you still have a question?
It wasn't a question. I was really just kind of address the idea of the younger people involved from our game on the ground here in Dayton. Getting folks going on through the petition drives and that sort of stuff. We really did have a small category of folks that were there consistently for us. But I think as we build towards the election day, and certainly on election day, we were very successful in really just going to people that the younger folks that ask, really directly, not face-to-face, not email, not something on their phone they can blow away, but just a direct ask. This is important. You need to be here for us. We had 90% participation from folks. We were able to cover election sites all over Montgomery County with our folks. And, I just think that that's the, I feel like I'm dating myself when I say this, but the younger generation, the Gen X, there's some of that we just have to address that a little bit. They need a little bit more of that personal touch. But once we gave them that, they were right there. So that's a lesson I learned.
And then a last question from Larry Turner, or comment.
I think I'm going to make
I think that's a really nice coda to this whole discussion, Larry. Thank you. I'd like you to join me in thanking the panelists for joining us today. And I'd like to thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for the